Well, hello everyone. This is Dale from the Precept classes in Cullman, Alabama, and I thank you for being with us as we continue our examination of 2 Samuel. This is lesson 5. We covered 5 chapters this week, and it was a very, very quick covering. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on, so we're just going to hit the high points today. I really encourage you to spend some time meditating on this, reading this, and seeking the Lord and saying, Lord, what is it you're trying to show me here? So let's just get into the details of what we saw this week. We're at chapter 16, and this is a continuation of the account of David leaving Jerusalem. Remember that Absalom had come in and had usurped the kingship from him. So what you see here is that Ziba brings victuals, brings victuals, brings food to David and supplies. And he actually lies to David because David said, hey, where is Mephibosheth? And Ziba says, oh, he decided to stay back because he thinks that his kingdom is about to be restored to him. We find out later on that that was a lie. We're going to see some things in just a moment about how David handled that kind of thing. And so, anyway, David believed him. He believed Ziba and gave him all of Mephibosheth's possessions. And there's a lot of principles in these various things right here, but here's one important one. David believed Ziba. He didn't really examine what he said. He didn't seek the Lord. And he found out that sometimes a friend can lie to you and a friend can deceive to you. So the next thing we see in this chapter is that Shemiah curses David. So David is coming out of Jerusalem, and this guy's running around. He's throwing rocks at him, and he's throwing dirt at him. He's cursing David, and it reminds me of Ernest T. Bass in Mayberry. I mean, he was just ranting and raving. But David allowed it. David says, well, perhaps this is from the Lord. And then he says, well, perhaps the Lord will look upon my affliction. Of course, some people wanted to kill him. But David said, no, let it happen, because if I'm supposed to come back, I'll come back. If not, then, it'll be all right. Absalom enters in Jerusalem, and he heeds the advice of Ahithophel, and who tells him to go in and take your father's concubines. And so Absalom does this. Chapter 17, we see that Ahithophel, who I call Phil because it's a lot easier to say, gives good advice. Now, he's a counselor. He was a counselor to David. He was a counselor to Absalom, and he says, let me take 12,000 men and let me pursue David now. And that was good advice, because if they had pursued David at that time, they probably would have caught him. Well, Absalom looks over at Hushai and says, hey, what advice do you give? And he basically recounts the history of David. He says, you know how your father is. He's not going to be hiding with the people. He's going to be in a cave. He's not going to be over here. He's going to be over there, and you're not going to be able to find him. And he counters old Phil's advice. And the reason this came about was the Lord's plan for Absalom was calamity. And so Absalom did listen to Hushai and did not pursue David at that point in time. And so David was saved due to the information that he procured from the spies that he left in Jerusalem. These folks sent information back and said, you better get out of here now. Well, old Phil comes along, and his counsel had been rejected. And so it says that he literally left. He went to his home city. He put his house in order, and he strangled himself. Now, we don't know if he did that immediately at this point in time, or if he did it after everything was said and done. I sort of suspected that after he heard what was about to happen with Absalom in the woods, that he realized, well, this is it. So he took his own life. It's a sad thing to a really good counselor for the most part. At this point in time, Amasa is established as the leader of Israel's army. He took Joab's place. Well, the reason is because Joab was with David. Israel was in a mess. We are seeing that there are consequences of sin. David was forgiven for what he had done. He was forgiven, yet the consequences were far and wide. Now, in chapter 18, we see that David divides the forces that he has with him. He has some of his mighty men. He has his servants. He has this group. So a third of them go with Joab. Abishai takes over a third. Ittai, you remember him? He was the one David said, why don't you stay behind? He said, no, I'm going to stay with you. And so he takes a third of them. And they are told, David tells them point blank to pursue Absalom, yet deal gently with him. Deal gently with him. Well, Absalom was a problem, and he deserved to die because he did not honor his father and his mother. He was a rebellious son. In the scripture, the Pentateuch, the law, said you're to stone a rebellious son. He had laid with his father's wife, really his father's wives, and Absalom did not keep the law, so he deserved to die. But David did not want him to die. Sometimes you see David trying to act like a good father when he should be executing the law. Sometimes you see him executing the law when he should be acting as a good father. David was a good father, though imperfect as we all are. And so we see that as they were pursuing, Absalom gets caught in the tree. A lot of times people say, oh, his hair got caught in the tree. Now, the scripture said that his head did. But because of what was said about his hair earlier and everything, more than likely his hair got hung up. Well, they find him. And Joab comes up and spears him 3 times, and then his men kill him. They did not deal very gently with Absalom. And so Absalom was going to send news of the death, and so he's going to send a runner. Well, Ahimaaz was the guy that came up and said, "Hey, let me run, let me run." And Joab said, "No, no, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to do that." And he said, "Why not? Why not?" He said, "I'm going to send the Cushite." So he sends the Cushite, and some interesting things related to that, because I think that Joab was concerned about how David might respond to this. And he'd rather send a Cushite who was probably a servant or a slave at best. Well, when you see what happened, David mourns for Absalom, and he mourns to the point of detriment to the nation. And Joab, boy, gets in his face and confronts him with this big time. Confronts him. And David does what was right. He arises and sits at the gate. But Joab said, "You know, you are bringing the nation down because you are loving those that hate you, and you're hating those who loved you, who gave their and sacrificed themselves today for it." So the nation was still in fear. The nation was quarreling. So David seeks to take back the nation and get everything the way it should. We see several little vignettes right here of how David was really exhibiting tremendous grace and forgiveness of God. With Shimei, Shimei comes back and says, "Forgive me for what I've said. I've sinned." That shows you that the cursing that he was speaking forth at the beginning, though it was all totally, absolutely true, was not necessarily initiated by God, but God used it. He was saying, "I sinned." Mephibosheth come back and said, I didn't do what Ziba said I did. And Mephibosheth was actually sort of mourning in the way that he was dressed and everything, how he let his hair grow and all this kind of stuff. Ziba was not punished, apparently. And a guy named Barzillai had wanted, David wanted him to come with him. And he said, "No, just let me stay home. Just let me stay home." So chapter 20, very quickly in our last minute. Sheba, a worthless fellow, rises up and calls all Israel to follow him rather than David. And Israel does. David had the men of Judah who were following him. And so David decided to go and capture Sheba and take the whole kingdom back. Before he does that, he puts away his concubines. Okay, he provides for them, but he never goes into them again because of what Absalom had done. So David sends Amasa and Joab's men to defeat Sheba. Apparently, Joab had been removed from the military leadership, maybe due to killing Absalom, disobeying David's orders, maybe because he confronted David, but I suspect it's the Absalom thing. But Amasa went out, but he delayed. David had given him 3 days and he didn't get it done. So David sent Abishai after Sheba at that time. Well, Abishai had Joab's men, and apparently Joab was with him because they encounter Amasa, and Joab murders him, much like he did Abner. Joab was not willing for anybody else other than himself to lead David's army. It becomes quite evident. So Joab finds Sheba at a place called Abel Beth Makkah. He heeds the appeal of a wise woman not to attack the town because the military was coming around trying to surround it. And this woman said, "Why are you doing this?" And Joab explains why. And she says, "Hang on a minute." So she goes downstairs, talks with the elders, talks to the people in town. They lop off Sheba's head. She goes up the top of the wall. She tosses it over to Joab. The story ends there for today. Here's what the bottom line is. Sin has consequences. Let us therefore not sin. Again, I'm Dale from the Precept classes in Cullman, Alabama, and I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.